don't always notice it at first. It doesn't arrive loudly. It doesn't announce itself. It shows up quietly, in the way you smile when you're already tired, in the way you say, "It's fine," when something inside you feels heavy, in how you keep showing up, even when your body is asking for rest. Have you ever realized that some of the kindest people you know also seem worn down? Not dramatic, not broken, just quietly exhausted. Maybe you've seen it in someone else, or maybe, if you're honest, you felt it in yourself. You're the one people rely on, the one who listens, the one who understands, the one who doesn't make things difficult. You carry things well, too well, and over time, you start to forget what it feels like to be carried. At first, kindness feels natural. It feels like who you are. You help because you care. You give because it feels right. You adjust because you don't want conflict. But slowly, subtly, something shifts. You begin to notice that you're always the one bending, always accommodating, always absorbing. You start saying yes when you mean no. You offer reassurance while your own chest feels tight. You listen to everyone else's stories while your own remain unspoken. And you tell yourself it's okay. You tell yourself this is just part of being a good person. But somewhere underneath that calm surface, something else is happening. A quiet fatigue begins to form. Not the kind that sleep fixes, the kind that comes from carrying too much of everyone else. What most people don't realize is that this doesn't usually start in adulthood. It starts much earlier, often in childhood. Not always through obvious trauma, not always through neglect. Sometimes it begins in very subtle ways. A child learns that being agreeable brings warmth, that being helpful brings praise, that staying quiet keeps the peace. They learn that their needs matter, but only after everyone else's. They learn that love feels more available when they don't take up too much space. So their nervous system adapts. They become attentive, emotionally perceptive, careful. They learn how to read a room before they learn how to read themselves, and this becomes their safety. Kindness becomes survival. Not consciously, not deliberately. It just settles into their body. And years later, as an adult, they still carry that pattern. They don't even remember choosing it. They just know how to be needed. They just know how to give. They just know how to stay pleasant when things feel uncomfortable. But here's what's interesting. When kindness is shaped by survival, it doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like responsibility. You feel responsible for other people's moods, responsible for harmony, responsible for not disappointing anyone. You become hyper-aware of emotional shifts. Someone sounds distant, and you wonder what you did wrong. Someone seems stressed, and you try to fix it. Someone is upset, and your chest tightens as if it's your job to make it better. And slowly, your inner world starts revolving around everyone else. You don't ask what you want, you ask what's needed. You don't notice your limits, you override them. You don't feel your anger, you swallow it, because anger feels dangerous. Disappointing someone feels worse. So you keep choosing kindness, even when it costs you, especially when it costs you. At first, it looks noble. You help friends move. You stay up late listening to their problems. You show up even when you're depleted. People call you generous. They say you're strong. They tell you how lucky everyone is to have you. And part of you believes that this is your role. But another part grows quieter. There's a subtle grief that forms when your life becomes organized around being useful. It doesn't scream, it hums. You start to feel invisible in rooms where everyone knows your name. You begin to sense that people see what you provide more than who you are.
And sometimes, in small, unguarded moments, you feel a strange emptiness, like you've been giving pieces of yourself away without realizing it. This is where the resentment starts. Not loud resentment, not explosive anger, quiet resentment. The kind that lives in your jaw, in your shoulders, in the way you sigh when you finally get a moment alone. You don't want to feel it. It feels unkind, so you push it down. You tell yourself other people have it worse. You tell yourself you're lucky to be needed. You tell yourself this is just how life works. But resentment doesn't disappear when you ignore it. It accumulates. It becomes emotional weight. And eventually, it leaks out in small ways. You snap at someone over something trivial. You feel irritated by requests that once felt easy. You withdraw without knowing why. And then you feel guilty for feeling that way. Because kind people aren't supposed to feel resentful. They're supposed to understand. They're supposed to forgive. They're supposed to keep giving. So you return to the pattern. You smooth things over. You apologize even when you don't know what you're apologizing for. You absorb discomfort so others don't have to. And this is where it gets deeper. When you consistently put yourself last, your sense of identity begins to blur. You stop noticing your own preferences. You don't know what you want to eat. You don't know what you feel like doing. You don't know what kind of life actually belongs to you. Your identity becomes relational. You become who others need you to be. You become the reliable one, the calm one, the strong one. But inside, there's a quiet disconnection growing. You feel tired in a way that doesn't make sense. You feel lonely even when you're surrounded by people. And sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet, you feel something hollow move through your chest. A question without words. Who am I when no one needs me? What most people don't realize is that chronic kindness often comes from emotional suppression. You learned early that expressing certain feelings made things harder, so you learned to be pleasant instead. You learned to minimize yourself. You learned to keep the peace. But emotions don't disappear when you suppress them. They wait. They collect in the body. Unspoken anger becomes tension. Unacknowledged sadness becomes fatigue. Unmet needs become numbness. And over time, your system becomes overloaded. This is emotional burnout. Not from doing too much, from being too little of yourself for too long. You might notice that you feel detached from joy, that things you once cared about don't move you anymore, that you fantasize about disappearing for a while, not dying, just being unreachable, just not having to be anything for anyone. You begin to crave silence. You crave space. But asking for space feels selfish, so you don't. You keep showing up. And here's what's paradoxical. The kinder you are, the more people come to expect it. They assume you're okay. They assume you'll handle it. They assume you don't mind. Your kindness teaches them what to overlook. They stop asking how you are. They stop checking your limits, not because they're cruel, but because you've trained them that you have none. This is how kindness slowly turns into invisibility. And invisibility doesn't feel peaceful. It feels lonely, dressed up as politeness. Some people give because they genuinely want to. Some people give because they're afraid of what happens if they don't. Both look the same from the outside, but they feel very different on the inside. One comes from abundance, the other comes from fear. Fear of rejection, fear of conflict, fear of being unlovable if you take up space. And when kindness is driven by fear, it becomes exhausting. It becomes performance. It becomes something you maintain instead of something you feel. And the cost is quiet but profound. You begin to abandon yourself, not dramatically, in small ways. You ignore your body, you override your intuition, you silence your truth. You stay in conversations that drain you. You agree to things you don't have energy for. You carry emotional weight that was never yours. And slowly, gently, you drift away from yourself. This is not because you're weak. It's because your nervous system learned that connection required self-erasure. And it did what it had to do. There's a part of you that learned, if I'm easy to love, I'll be safe. So you became easy. You became adaptable. You became kind. But kindness without boundaries isn't kindness. It's self-neglect wearing a soft voice. And that's where this story
actually lives. Not in cruelty, not in anger, but in quiet abandonment. The kind that happens when you keep choosing everyone else. You don't usually notice the moment it becomes too much. There isn't a clear breaking point. It feels more like erosion, small pieces of you worn away over time. You start waking up already tired, not physically, emotionally. You feel heavy before the day even begins, and yet you still show up. You still answer messages. You still listen. You still offer support. You move through your life carrying invisible weight, and no one sees it because you carry it quietly. There's a strange loneliness in being the strong one. People assume you're okay. They assume you don't need much. They assume you have endless emotional capacity. And you rarely correct them, because somewhere inside you've learned that needing things feels unsafe. So you minimize yourself. You tell yourself it's not that bad. You tell yourself others need you more. But here's what's interesting. Your body keeps track of everything your mind tries to ignore. It holds the tension in your shoulders. It keeps the fatigue in your chest. It stores the unsaid words in your throat. You might notice headaches that don't have a clear cause, a tight jaw, a constant low-level anxiety. This isn't random. This is what happens when your inner world is constantly overwritten, when your nervous system stays in a state of quiet alert. You're always scanning, reading tone, adjusting, making sure everyone else is okay before you check in with yourself. That kind of emotional vigilance takes energy, a lot of it. And eventually, something inside you starts asking questions, not loudly, softly. Why am I always the one who adapts? Why does my comfort come last? Why do I feel guilty for wanting rest? These questions don't feel rebellious. They feel tired. You might start to notice moments of irritation that surprise you. A simple request feels heavy. A small inconvenience feels overwhelming. You don't recognize yourself in these reactions. You wonder what's wrong with you. But nothing is wrong. This is what happens when your emotional exhaustion finally reaches the surface. You've been carrying too much for too long. What most people don't realize is that chronic kindness often comes with emotional suppression. You've learned how to be patient. You've learned how to be understanding, but you haven't learned how to express anger safely. You haven't learned how to disappoint people without panic. You haven't learned how to say no without explaining yourself. So those emotions go underground. They don't disappear. They wait. And when they finally surface, they come out sideways. Passive comments, sudden withdrawal, snapping over something small. Not because you're cruel, because you're full. There's also grief in this. Grief for the parts of yourself you didn't get to develop. Grief for the dreams you postponed. Grief for the version of you that might have existed if you hadn't been so busy holding everything together. Sometimes you realize you don't even know what you want anymore. Someone asks a simple question, "What do you feel like doing?" And your mind goes blank. You've spent so long responding to others that your own desires feel distant, faded. This is identity erosion. It doesn't feel dramatic. It feels quiet. You become the role you play, the helper, the listener, the dependable one. And somewhere along the way, you lose contact with your authentic self. Not because you wanted to, because you adapted. And adaptation, when it becomes chronic, turns into self-abandonment. But here's where it gets deeper. Your kindness doesn't just affect you, it shapes your relationships. When you never express your limits, people don't learn where they are. They begin to assume your availability. They rely on your flexibility. They unconsciously build their expectations around your silence, not out of malice, out of pattern. You teach people how to treat you by what you tolerate, and when you tolerate too much, you slowly become invisible. You might notice that people come to you when they need something, but rarely when they want to know how you are. You become emotionally useful, but not emotionally held. And that hurts in a way that's hard to explain, because you care about these people. You don't want to resent them, so you turn the resentment inward. You blame yourself. You tell yourself you should be more grateful. You tell yourself you're overreacting. But what you're actually feeling is the cost of being endlessly accommodating. There's a concept in psychology sometimes called pathological altruism. It describes what happens when helping becomes harmful, when giving costs your health, when supporting others prevents you from supporting yourself, when kindness creates dependency instead of connection. But you don't need a term for it to feel it. You feel it in your bones, in your fatigue, in the quiet emptiness that follows you through your day. You might start to fantasize about escape, not running away forever, just disappearing for a while, turning your phone off, being unreachable, not having to hold space for anyone. That desire doesn't mean you don't love people. It means you're depleted. And depletion changes how you experience the world. Colors feel duller. Joy feels muted. Even small tasks feel heavy. You start operating on emotional autopilot, doing what you've always done, giving what you've always given, but without presence, without energy, without yourself. And then there's shame, because kind people aren't supposed to feel this way. They're supposed to be patient. They're supposed to be grateful. They're supposed to keep showing up. So you hide your exhaustion. You keep the smile. You say you're fine. You become very good at appearing okay. But internally, something is unraveling. What's actually happening is that your internal worth has been replaced by external validation. You measure your value by how useful you are, how needed, how appreciated. And when you're not needed, you feel empty, because no one taught you to exist without performing. This is survival behavior, not weakness. You learned that love was conditional, so you became indispensable. But unconditional presence was never modeled for you, so you don't know how to offer it to yourself. And here's the paradox. You give so much to others, yet you feel unseen. You are surrounded by people, yet you feel alone. You are praised for your kindness, yet something inside you feels hollow. This is what happens when compassion is disconnected from self-respect, when care flows outward but never inward, when you become a source for everyone else while slowly drying up inside. You might notice that you struggle with boundaries, not because you don't understand them, but because boundaries feel like rejection. They feel like conflict. They feel like risking connection. So instead of saying no, you endure. Instead of expressing discomfort, you tolerate. Instead of asking for space, you disappear emotionally. Boundaries require you to believe that you're allowed to take up space, and that belief doesn't come easily when your identity was built around being easy to love. So you keep choosing others over yourself, again and again, until something inside you starts to break, not loudly, quietly. And that's where the self-destruction lives, not in dramatic collapse, in slow erosion, in chronic fatigue, in suppressed anger, in a life that slowly stops feeling like your own.